Welcome to the Middle-Aged Bodcast with me, Raging Rich.
And me, T.A. Shelano.
T.A., we have our second guest of Season 3 with us today.
Yeah, that's right, Rich. We're joined by, well, from my point of view, fellow author Alan Rose. Alan, welcome to the Middle-Aged Podcast. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be on.
You want to just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so at the moment, like you say, we're sort of aspiring writers, or we've just released sort of like our first books and things. So yeah, I'm looking to make this into a more sort of consistent hobby, if not sort of sideline sort of career move. Also trying to basically be a wider advocate for men's mental health at the moment. So I've been involved with sort of like a support group that is sort of up and down the UK. And yeah, I just want to be able to take these opportunities to talk more openly about my experiences in both sort of writing and mental health.
That's great. Thanks very much. So on that, the theme around the mental health work, you're a facilitator for Andy's Man Club.
Yes.
It's a men's suicide prevention charity. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so just before we go into, I'll just say a quick disclaimer. So, like when I'm talking about Andy's Man Club, yeah, I am a facilitator there, but these are all just my own thoughts and experiences, and anything that I do say doesn't necessarily represent Andy's Man Club as a whole as well. But yeah, so I've loved Andy's Man Club from the moment that I stepped in. So I've been going there for about 18 months now. So definitely over about a year and a half. And it's just been a really positive experience. My wife actually found this as a sort of a support group, and she said, just give it sort of a shot, because I've never really done anything like this before. And it was just a really positive experience. The first time I sort of turned up there was, lots of other men there who needed a space to talk, and, it was very, very comfortable from the get-go. And it's just a fantastic space. So basically we all sort of like just sit in a circle, we go through a range of questions, and we basically talk just openly about how things are going. And it's developed into like a good way to sort of connect with your local community, because you see other men who exist in the same sort of like town as you. And everybody's sort of going through something, positive and negative, that they just want to have the space to talk about. And, so yeah, that's the sort of initial impression I got from it. So yeah, it's just a fantastic space.
We've actually found, haven't we, that there's a couple of groups that are quite local to us. Randomly, there isn't one in Birmingham, which is, I find strange. But yeah, there are a few local. There's definitely one in Wolverhampton, which is our next sort of city after Birmingham, and there is a group there. So yeah, it seems to be something that I'm noticing more advertising for as well now, and certainly being a lot more prominent in the conversation, which is great for promoting men's mental health and trying to improve on that situation.
Yeah, there's loads of them up and down the country, but there's also other sort of groups that emulate this as well. So I know that there's a lot of groups that meet like local football clubs and things like that. So it's not necessarily just Andy's Man Club that exists. There are lots of group meetings and group sessions and things like that. And I think it's good, because I think that recently there has been like a massive drive in terms of promoting men's mental health, and there seems to be like an awareness of it now that didn't exist, I wouldn't say sort of maybe like a decade ago or so. We're seeing more adverts on the TV and stuff like that, and seeing more sort of like posters and advertising for it around. So I think it's definitely at its height now, which is really good. And it's all just about maintaining that and making sure that these spaces continue to exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've sort of featured on this podcast quite a bit, and in season 2 we actually had Mel from the Men Against Mountains movement on as a guest, which again is another sort of version, etc. And some of the work that she does was absolutely sort of fascinating to listen to. So it's great that these outlets are there for people and whatnot that weren't, as you say, wouldn't have been there a few years ago. I mean, from your own point of view, what sort of really led to your involvement from a personal perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I'll just say I did listen to that episode with Mel. It was really good. Everything that she was saying, and absolutely, there's like different forms of talking, which is really good as well. So she definitely covered a lot of really good points on there as well. And yeah, the group therapy thing has sort of worked for me. I think I initially joined just because I've moved to sort of like a new place and things like that, and I didn't necessarily have sort of like the widest sort of like social network, and so I think it's a good place to go because you just want to form a connection with people generally. So it comes from basically a place where, for most of my life, I've sort of been bottling things up like emotions and thoughts, and I just necessarily haven't had the opportunity or even sort of like the means or the language to actually be able to, talk about things. And I think that this is Andy's Man Club works really well because it gives you a series of questions that help you just categorize what sort of things you can talk about and in what sort of level. So like the first question is always, how's your week been? And you can just quickly sort of categorize on a week by week basis. How am I feeling? Is it better from the last one, or have I had like an up and down this week, or has it been sort of generally good? And I think that it's good because it gives you those sorts of routines to think in and process all of the stuff that's going on. Because when you're in a really deep position, it's really difficult to pick apart exactly when, thoughts started happening, or how much something from ages ago has affected you and whether it's coming back up and things like that. So I found it really useful for that because, like the initial sort of reasons I went there was because I definitely had a lot that I needed to talk about from my past, and was able through like a series of weeks to start really processing and getting to grips with what it was that I was actually thinking and feeling, and getting on top of all of the things that I've personally experienced in life. So yeah, it's really useful for that.
How many people go to this in your area?
It varies a lot, but we get sort of like 20 to maybe even 40 people turning up every single week, which is just amazing. So and there are some people who are, they turn up sort of like every week because they need it for that amount of time. There's other people who sort of just drop in and out, sort of just need it for a little bit of a boost every now and again, and then some people, turn up for maybe just one or two sessions or so, and they realize, oh, well, it's given them a lot to think about, but there's other sort of like forms of therapy that they want to go into and sort of experience. So yeah, there's quite a lot of people, and I think the stats are varied sort of every week, but up and down the country, it's sort of it's in the thousands. There's thousands of men that basically join in with this group every single week.
It's fantastic. And as you say, it does seem like it's something that's getting a lot more prominent, talking about men's mental health. And I actually had a little look at some of the socials for Andy's Man Club recently, and they are seemingly getting more and more interaction and more men going along there, chat about things. And as you say, whether that's that they've bottled things up or it's things from the past that are sort of coming back and being brought back into their lives. And it seems to be doing some great work in supporting men with their mental health there. We did say at the start that you're a facilitator for Andy's Man Club.
Yeah.
How can you give us a little bit of information just about what a facilitator does and how you got involved in that, please?
Yeah, so basically a facilitator is just someone who's just an ordinary person who has been turning up for a long time and feels that they're in a position sort of mentally to give back to the space that's allowed them to talk. And so basically facilitators are, there's no sort of like status or anything like that. They're purely just other men that just want to give back to the club. And so all we do realistically is we just orientate the sessions. So we basically organize people in terms of, answering the questions and things like that. And then we also set up the tea and the biscuits at the beginning of the session. So yeah, that's really good. So we get to set up the session. But I think like one of the best parts of doing it for me is when there'll always be a facilitator who stands outside of whatever the venue is, and there's sort of like a greeter. So like if there's someone new who comes along, it just feels really good to be able to see that Andy's Man Club has got a lot of reach, and new people are coming in and trying it out, and it feels really good to sort of bring someone new into the venue, talk through what the session's about, get them a tea or a coffee or whatever. And so basically, in terms of the facilitator duties, it's more sort of just creating that space somewhere else for other men as another ordinary man, and that's quite good, and it's really effective.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Having somebody then who's been going to that and has then, I suppose, worked through some own sort of feelings, and then has got to a point where they feel they can share that and help others become at ease to then take advantage of that is probably a big thing, isn't it? Because for many people, the first time going to something like that would be very daunting.
Yeah.
So it's good to have somebody, I suppose, there that can help you overcome that.
On the door as well, sort of like is good, because you see people of all walks of life walking through that door, and like for everybody, sort of taking that first step is a very, really daunting process. This idea that, you're actually going into this space with a load of strangers essentially, and you're thinking about talking about yourself, is a massive nerve-wracking thing to do. But once you've taken that step through the door, you feel like a sense of freedom almost. And there's loads of other people there who say they're from all different walks of life, like I say. So we've got people who are completely different ages, completely different sort of like socioeconomic backgrounds. We've got people of different sort of ethnicities and everything like that. And it's a really positive space that just doesn't judge you at all for who you are. It just wants to provide that space for you to talk, and seeing, all manner of people walking towards the door and you're able to greet them and bring them in just feels like a really positive thing for just men everywhere.
I think it's fantastic. And sort of away from then the Andy's Man Club for a second, like myself, you published your debut novel.
Yes.
Last year, or late last year. Warm with Pride.
Yes.
You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, that sort of book is really connected to sort of this journey of mental health that I've had. I've wanted to sort of create a story which is around sort of men bottling up their emotions, and I've used a nice little sort of like sci-fi world in order to make that happen. So the main character is basically based on that sort of stereotype of men, and that sort of bottles everything up. They don't feel anything. They don't want to acknowledge that there's other ways of thinking about things, and basically all of the sort of problems that arise from that. So, actually writing this entire book and being able to sort of put it out into the world is something that I think was just more on a personal level. It's something I just wanted to do, because there's a lot of things in there that I think reflect the ways that I used to think and sort of like bottle things up. But then, this is a nice sort of exploration of that and what positive things men should be looking for sort of like in their lives, like good connections with people, having the freedom to talk and not limiting themselves to sort of like a stereotype that actually affects them in a negative way.
So is this kind of standalone, or are you turning this into a bit of a series, or what's your sort of thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the moment, it is a standalone thing, but I've got in my notes app, I've got a short story anthology planned where I want to go in and explore the world in a bit more detail, but I don't think I have another like central novel to do in that world. So this is the first time I'm saying this as well, but yeah, I'm really excited because I've got some short stories already written to encapsulate what this world is about and sort of more the problems maybe with this sort of dystopian world that I've created with a lot of inspiration, maybe from a few things that are going on now. But yeah, so short story anthology for sure.
It's interesting about the short story thing, because I read something the other day where somebody talked about that, where in terms of having either standalones or series where they can then do either dipping into the characters or the themes in a short story, which I think is an interesting way of doing it, because, you and I both know, the challenge when you're trying to write a novel is trying to replicate that. I mean, from a personal perspective, I went on to a second one, tried to do something differently, and weirdly kind of ended up very much drifting back towards the first. So it's weird how that kind of happens, I think. And the short story element is probably quite a a good way of then building into what you've done with the first novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely. So I want to ideally, I want to explore it a little bit more. In time when I find the time to write. That's something I think you're doing amazing, T.A. So I'm keeping track of at the moment. You're doing this writing challenge, and I think that's some brilliant commitment. That's something that I can't emulate at the moment, but I definitely would want to try and do that. I feel like we've all got lots that we want to get out there, and I think that finding the time to make sure that we're putting this into the right sort of formats and things like that is really important. So I want to sort of create a short story anthology where some of the new characters maybe have like brush shoulders with some of the things that are going on in the main book as well. And there'll be a couple of winks and a couple of nods, but mostly their own sort of like issues living in that world that I've created, because you can't cram it all into one novel. You want to explore maybe some other things in a more nuanced way with a bit more space. But obviously, you can't go too far from the main plot line in that. So,
thanks for mentioning my 100-day challenge, which has been something I know we've talked about a bit. But the interesting thing I found with that was I decided that obviously sort of at the beginning of the year really, and kind of 8 weeks on. What I've found really interesting about that is how it completely changes your thought process when you're saying I'm going to do something, because we all put things off all the time, and the issue around finding time. And I've listened to different things writers have said as well. And I was listening to a guy named Ivan Scott, an American author, who said that he get up and write at 4:30 in the morning because it's the only time of the day where the world didn't need something from him, like his family or his job. And that I found that quite inspiring. And as part of the challenge, on an occasion with commitments, I've actually got up and done that sometimes at like 5 minutes. And it's how that from a mental health perspective or a challenge perspective completely changes the focus and the discipline. And talk about it obviously in terms of as each day on sort of social media, but the amount of progress by doing that little, I mean, some days obviously more than others, but little and often approach, it's amazing how much you can get done. And if you're going to do short stories, that's probably, you could probably rattle them off. But it is hard. I appreciate it isn't always easy to find the time, but even half an hour you can achieve. Sometimes you think.
I think that routine's like really just important, and I think that it's the right mindset to have, especially when it comes to like I do think like for your mental health, it's really good to have something productive that you can invest your time into in a healthy way. And like just for me personally, like writing is definitely that sort of outlet where I can put in a load of thoughts and sort of mess them around a little bit and see what basically comes out. But I think the routine thing is definitely really important, and I think applying it to more hobbies, like finding that time in your day essentially just to make sure that you do something that you love basically every day, is a really positive step for your mental health altogether, because it's about sort of nurturing those things that make you enjoy life essentially, and that's really important. And it was just a little bit of a callback to AMC. Like the second question is what's a positive from your week, and that's a fantastic question, because you can think about the little things that you're doing on sort of like a week-to-week basis or a day-to-day basis that are just really consistent and that you're really enjoying. And for me, it comes down to like writing or cooking or something like that, and being more productive with stuff. And like I would like to use maybe this challenge for like learning a language or something like that, because I think that something very productive like that could be really, really useful as well. But yeah, I'm loving the challenge that you're doing at the moment. It's actually really inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, writing a book in another language would be a challenge.
Baby steps.
Just on the follow-up point on the thing you said there about the second question, the groups being around a highlight or a positive. This is something else I know we've mentioned, but I saw it on social media at the sort of end of last year, was this idea of writing something each week down and putting it in a tin effectively. And at the end of the year, you see what year you had or the positives from the year you had. And me and my wife have actually been doing that each Sunday. We will write something down on a piece of paper, and we've been kind of putting it in like a old chocolate tin from over Christmas. And yeah, so I think that some of these ideas, the little things that you can do, can make a big difference. It isn't always the big sort of things is it to aim for. It's those incremental, smaller steps as such.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And it's about that mindset, isn't it? That positive mindset and thinking like, well, even if you've had like a week where you haven't maybe got as much done as you wanted to or something like that, you've still got something to take away from that week into the next one and something maybe to inspire you going forward. And as I, answer these week by week questions at AMC, sort of like the positives from my week are usually, not necessarily major things at all. Like obviously one week I could say like, yeah, I published a book, but for the most part, it's just like, you know what, I made a really good like meal the other day, like I baked a really nice pie or something, or just took like a really nice long walk somewhere or something like that. And again, it's sort of about categorizing and processing the things that you go through, and being able to look forward to like things that you are, what might be your little thing next week as well that you're looking forward to. So it's a really good way of, I think us as men, we don't necessarily get that chance to sort of process exactly, everything that's going on in our lives, but definitely having those tools to sort of look at it from a different way, and setting ourselves those little challenges to look for the little things is really important. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned cooking there, Alan, and we did briefly before we started recording talk about the chicken satay and everything that's going on there with my journey. But you mentioned the cooking and obviously the finding positives in things. And for me, that's been one of the things I've been trying to do a lot more of, is the cooking, because I've never really enjoyed doing it. And I found it really hard to motivate myself to do it. And I mean, T.A. jokes about Raging Rich's recipes and whatnot. But the one thing that I did do this week, we always talk about my what do we call them, my signature enchiladas. And I was going, I can't just keep making these. And I actually made a bolognese pasta bake earlier this week and did post it on our social media about that. But I found that brilliant, that I'd made something a little bit different, and I tried different things with it. I'd got ingredients I'd not normally think to put in there, and I actually did a little bit of a shop, and I will tell this story on air to embarrass myself because it is quite funny. So, originally the plan was make enchiladas. I'll order in a shop, and I actually ordered an Iceland delivery to get a few bits and bobs. I was like, oh, I'll get a few other things delivered to help me, and I can just make that. I'll order it to come tonight, and I'll cook it tonight. So I set it all up, and I get my order going. Brilliant. It's going to come between 5 and 7. And I was sitting there waiting, got to 6 o'clock. I'm going, I haven't even had a notification. No, I'd accidentally ordered it for the next day. And so I was then scrambling to get everything delivered a little bit earlier. And that's what made me decide I'm not doing my enchiladas, I'm doing something different. And I ordered all this extra stuff. So even just that, something normally that would completely put me off. That would normally make me go, I'm going over the road. There's a Domino's pizza. What did you say? Yeah. 8 feet away. So I'd just be going over there. But I didn't. I stuck with it. And then I went, actually, let's do something a little bit different. So, and I found this sense of achievement about it. And it was a big positive from making something. It gives you those, the extra portions to eat and things like that.
Yeah.
I do need to improve on my cooking. So if you've got any tips for that, we can definitely talk about that at some point.
I don't know if I'm the best person to talk to, honestly, but I expect when we say the chicken satay, I expect a klaxon to go off or something in the podcast. But yeah, I mean, what? So the way I've sort of got into cooking, I don't know how this will make people view me basically, but me and my wife, we take on sort of like Gusto and like HelloFresh, and we've been trying to do a bit more of that because that really does bring like a lot of recipes that we wouldn't have tried, like things like enchiladas and things like shakshuka, more sort of like Middle Eastern dishes and things like that, or even just a hearty sort of like fish and chips or something like that. Is just when it's homemade, it just feels so much more sort of like, I don't know. I always think that when I'm cooking, I'm sort of enjoying something twice. Like I'm enjoying the process of making something, and then I get to eat it afterwards as well. And so cooking is definitely really, really important. And I found that, I definitely have things that I prefer to make now because to just like I've just given it a go and it's turned out all right, and now they're sort of like my go-to things. So for example, like making my own sort of like burgers with their own herbs and spices in them and things like that, or like I say, making like some breadcrumb chicken or fish fillets or something like that. And yeah, and even just making my own chips as well, just chopping a potato up and just coating it in the right stuff and then putting it in the oven. Like even something as simple as that is something pretty nice, pretty enjoyable. So yeah, I think cooking is definitely like a little thing that definitely makes your day a lot better, because it's something that you can pour a little bit of time into. You can huff a little bit while you're doing it as well, but then you get to enjoy something quite immediately after the process as well. And I don't think that a lot of other hobbies give you necessarily that sense of satisfaction so soon after doing the process of making it. So yeah, cooking's definitely really, really important.
Well, I think based on that, T.A., that I'm now going to scrap Shelano starters from Raging Rich's recipes, and I'm going to have Alan's appetizers put in there.
Let's just keep the alliteration going there, Rich, as best as you can. That's good. But I think it's interesting with your cooking as well, actually, Rich. And actually, in terms of with the podcast, the things that we've kind of then ended up doing and focusing on that we absolutely wouldn't have done either. It's funny how those little things, like you say, like positive things you can do, and it just then leads to something else because, you do have an abundance of takeaways near where you live. And so then it is easier to fall into that trap rather than actually to cook something. And I'm not the best cook either. And I don't think you know this story because I didn't know that one that you just told. But, I occasionally cook. My wife I think is good at cooking. So it's often she's the one that does the most. And then when I did what is classed as my signature dish, which is that pilaf thing I do with the rice, but she said, "Oh, do some veg with it as well." I don't like trying to do multitudes of things. And then I tried to steam broccoli. Hadn't done was put the lid on the thing to hold the steam in. So then she went, "Well, this is raw," and I couldn't even get away with its al dente. They were barely sweating, let alone cooked. And she was like, had you actually put the... I'm like, no, I've had it on. And she went, yeah, but you haven't actually put the thing on, have you? It won't. And that was a little bit embarrassing. And I must admit, it was kind of upsetting because it took away from what was my signature dish. But it's a bit of a learning curve, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things like when we get these like gusto meals and stuff like that, and it's telling us like to do things a certain way. we haven't even got a sieve. Like, how on earth are we meant to do this? So we just got to just get past it. It's a little bit of a challenge, and we overcome it. But yeah, so I think cooking brings like a nice little challenge as well sometimes, doesn't it? Like that if you haven't got like that utensil or whatever, then you can sort of just make something work. But yeah, I've been foul of not cooking broccoli properly many times and not having pasta in for too long and stuff like that. So everything's a bit tougher than it should be, but it still tastes all right.
She always has a go at me as well, where in terms of, if you kind of end up Googling how long something should cook for, and she'll always say to me like, you just kind of feel your way through, you figure it out, you do that. And I'm like, yeah, that's what people who are really good do. People who aren't really good need some help. We need to know, is it 5 minutes? Is it 8 minutes? Is it 190 degrees? What is it? And I think that's the other thing. It's that learning curve point sometimes, but it's entertaining. Just go back to writing for a second. Did you actually try and go down the traditional route, or did you purely go straight for self-publish?
I did try the traditional route. I got a few rejections, which was absolutely fine. It was my first book, so I was a bit like, look, if I get something back, then fine, that's okay. But at the end of the day, it's sort of like, it's still like a thing that I've written for me personally. And then if there's just a way to get it out there that makes it easier, then that's good. I did get a couple of offers, but it was more sort of like down what they call the hybrid, I think it is, publishing route. So I'd have to pay basically a set amount out, and then they handle all the marketing and things like that. So just financially, I just wasn't in a position to do that. Otherwise, I would have taken that route. But yeah, and then I basically had to talk with some more sort of authors and things like that. And there's a guy sort of like in Lancashire where I live who went down the self-publishing route, and sort of listening to him talk about, just what he what his experience was, and just sort of like the liberty that you get in publishing by yourself is actually quite a good thing, because you've got, you know, full control almost. And so there's I'm definitely happy just having something out there, published my own way and all in my own words, with just a couple of formatting errors maybe in a couple of places, but it's definitely been a wonderful experience nonetheless. So yeah.
So your cookbook, yeah, there's to be next thing. If you can either get it traditionally published, if Jamie Oliver or
oh, don't mention him. You know, I'm not a fan of him. You can't be having that.
Gordon Ramsay coming. There we go, Ramsay and Raging Rich's recipes.
Yeah, I'm all the guys from Sorted Food, but okay.
But yeah, no, that's interesting. But yeah, we do need to do more on the cooking. Yeah. And Rich still hasn't cooked the satay for me either, which I know a few people have said. You know, you know what this obsession with me cooking the satay for you is? Because I made it. Because it's documented. Most people thought when we talked about it that was what you. That was originally the plan, but instead he ended up making it for his lady friend, which is fine. But
have my lady friend.
No, but
when we originally put the challenge together, that's the point. So I knew it was going to be cooked for you,
because that's how legendary this satay's become. That everyone mentions it. It's gone on for so long.
Giving people what they want.
Exactly. Who knew a chicken satay would become so famous? Sorry, Alan.
That's terrible.
It's just entertaining how this satay sort of just taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, it has. It has. I was just wondering, Alan, like T.A., you're working on your second novel, and we've seen a few things on social. I know you mentioned the short story anthology that you were putting together as well. They're on your socials. You mentioned On Fields Above.
Yeah,
as a second novel. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
So yeah, that's another novel I've had in my notes app for a long time now, and I finally just wanted to start writing it, and I'm very happy that I've sort of completed more or less the first draft of it now. But this is a story in sort of like an even further dystopia. You're thinking more sort of like maybe a Mad Max style place with a lot of shanty towns and people just trying to get by, living off the land as best they can and things like that. And yeah, so this book is come out of, again, something, you know, just, again, it's about sort of like processing maybe a few things that a few things that I wish I sort of had processed a little bit earlier. And it's all to do with sort of like the idea of brotherhood and a bit of hope and separation and trying to make the best almost out of the world that you're given, essentially. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to hopefully release this book later this year. Because again, it's another story that I've definitely just had rattling around in my head for a while, and now I've finally put it to paper or to a word processor. Yeah, I'm just really proud of it. So
fantastic. You mentioned brotherhood there as one of the sort of themes of it, and I have noticed. I said again off air, I've started reading Worn with Pride. I'm still quite early into it, but even just from the short portion of it that I've read at the moment, you already get that kind of feeling of brotherhood kind of being part of that as well, and kind of that social aspect of the main character kind of coming through. And I know you've sort of mentioned about using some of the idea of kind of bottling things up and emotionally and things like that within that character. So yeah, it's interesting keeping those themes going, and also when you mentioned the short story anthology and keeping that around that kind of theme, I think that's a really good way. I don't know if you've, obviously there's a sci-fi element to your book. T.A. will probably just roll his eyes when I mention it, but if you ever follow like Star Wars and they branch it off into all their different things and stuff like that, where you've got kind of that main story, but then they create these other stories that tie into it and things like that. It's interesting that you're doing something as well where you kind of set this world up and then you can kind of go back into that world, but in a different sort of viewpoint.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I don't think it'll be a necessarily Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point, but it will. I've definitely thought of.
Speaking his language there, he's cheering it because any mention of the Marvel universe is music to his ears, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Sorry to disappoint, but I don't think it will be as big a franchise as that, perhaps. But yeah, so it's about I think it's about themes and sort of masculinity and things like that. And we're born with pride. There's definitely sort of like a sense of brotherhood, but I think that it could be more sort of like a negative aspect of that, where perhaps there isn't support so much as there is sort of just more sort of an unsaid acceptance of other people's problems, but not doing anything about it. Whereas this new book that I've got is, On Fields Above, it's sort of like everybody just knows what everybody's about almost. It's about learning who other people are in order to get by in this world almost. And so I think it's quite an interesting take that I've gone on this time, because I just wanted to, after writing Warm with Pride, which is fairly sort of miserable at some points, I've really wanted to write something that's just a lot more sort of hopeful. And yeah, so I'm very excited to hopefully share this with everyone, hopefully later this year.
So what's your wife and family, friends, etc. think about the writing?
So yeah, my wife and her family have been very sort of like supportive through this. They've bought a few copies and things like that, but it's something that I'm tempted just to have it for myself at this point, and then my book was sort of like find people who are interested in it. So my wife has tried reading maybe like the first 3 chapters or so, and she's making her way through it as well, but she prefers much shorter chaptered books, which so just based on the formatting isn't necessarily agreeing with her at the moment. But it's really just positive just to have other people looking at your work and things that are going on in your head. And to everybody who's already bought a copy, just thank you so much for supporting me and for just having a go at just my silly little thoughts essentially.
I mean, it's something we've obviously spoke about on this, and it is difficult for the sort of independent self-published authors. It's not easy out there. There's so many people out there. There's the whole, obviously, the issue now of AI generated books and things coming out and all sorts of things as well, against also the traditional publishing angles. So it's hard. I think the idea of, and this is even from my point of view, I think writing something, for yourself or something you want to write, rather than I suppose sometimes getting caught up in this thing with the traditional angle of what they want it to become. It's quite important, because it feels like you've then done something more true to what you wanted to do when you do get that feedback from people. I mean, my wife was effusive with praise, wasn't she, Rich? What was her quote back at me? Well, it's better than I thought it had been. It wasn't really what I was expecting, but it was that kind of level of positivity. It's always good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. And yeah, I think it's about being sort of true to yourself. And I'm not into not sort of other authors, but I've definitely read some traditionally published things that I've been like, I'm surprised that this actually got through, or I'm surprised that this is something that's actually been put into like through the authentic sort of traditional publishing process, because there's some traditionally published things that I've read and I thought, I can do better than this. And that's not from an egotistical point of view. It's just there are stories that I want to be seen written in a certain way, and there's certain characterization that I want to see, and there's certain there's a lot of like TV shows and things like that you see nowadays where maybe like the ending just isn't as satisfying as the whole build up has been and things like that, and you just think, I could do something that just comes to a better sort of conclusion than that. There's lots of writing out there, and so like the best thing to do obviously is just to support as many these sort of self-published authors as possible, because there are really good stories out there. And that's sort of why I do this payday plugs thing on my socials, by sort of looking at some indie authors or people who are publishing through their own means, because there are some fantastic stories out there that you won't find in the traditionally published sort of world, and we've got to really support that.
Yeah, I think that probably is a good point for us to bring in Rich, obviously a friend of the show, Safi from Idiosyncrasy as well. Obviously she's done in terms of launching that website there for the independent authors from the beginning of this year. And her podcast, actually, that's where I mentioned earlier, Ivan Scott, it was on her podcast. Yeah. And it is really fascinating. Then you get to to listen to people who wouldn't have those platforms. And there are such great books out there. And I think almost getting rid of this, that just because something is independent, self-published, does not mean it isn't good. I mean, obviously, by the same token, it doesn't mean that it is. But there is that stigma almost of, if it's not been through that kind of traditional route, people might think it's not. But actually, there are some great books out there. The more we can kind of do to help, I think, inspire people to think in that way, the better, really.
Yeah. Like, I've had like one of my friends like has bought the book and read it and everything, and he messaged me and just said, "Oh my God, this was like, this was actually really good." Like, not in like a patronising sort of way, but it's just like, oh, this is an actual a story almost, and he said like you should be really proud of it. Like, British people tend to be quite polite about stuff, don't we? We might not say anything at all, but to actually come out and actually say something like that, is really, really humbling. So that's a really good thing. But yeah, indie authors are out there. They've got great stories out there. We just need to look in the right places to find them.
100%. The thing that I find really interesting with this, obviously, T.A, with your journey into becoming an independent author, and then meeting Alan, people like yourself, and Safi with her podcast and her project. What I find really interesting with these independent authors, and it's a terrible example for me to give, but 50 Shades of Grey, that was something written on a Twilight forum as a fan fiction that got turned into, it's terrible that I know this as well and I have no idea what, but it turned into then its own story. It's turned into a film. You think that's somebody who's just writing something on a forum somewhere, and you kind of think to yourself, you don't know what the future holds with these stories that independent authors are trying to tell.
Yeah.
It only takes one person, the right person, to see it, and then the opportunity to then have, as horrible as it sounds, because I think some people say it's going against it then, but like having the machine behind you, like, push books and things and various works. But it's interesting how things do suddenly get that sometimes aren't as strong as others, and
it's the timing thing as well. It's always interesting, and I think that's a thing that I've heard quite a bit around this kind of thing, is that you could write a story that, certainly as far as the industry is concerned, isn't right at one time and then suddenly becomes the right thing. It's interesting. I think Forrest Gump actually is interesting, because that was a book that I think was out for a long, long time ago, didn't necessarily generate a great deal of interest, then becomes a huge Hollywood film a long time later. It is weird how some things take off and some things don't, or why and when. And the thing what Alan and I were talking about with the whole traditional publishing route, you could write your story, you can write it out, and they go no, and then 2 years' time they might really want that story. It's really a strange dynamic around it. It's difficult. So I think that's why the writing for yourself thing becomes more important, because if you try and write for what somebody else wants, then you've got the whole thing of what's popular today. By the time it's gone through their process, it's probably not popular anymore as well. So it's not always like you can just do that even. And with the AI thing now, people are just doing.
I think it's mad, sort of like how writing can really be from a very long time ago actually, and then suddenly it's really popular. And I think that one of the biggest examples is sort of like with Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and everything like that. And obviously that was written almost like a century ago now, but like then it took 3 feature films, and it's perhaps one of the biggest franchises ever. So I think that's an amazing thing. And there's other sort of like mediums where people are telling their own stories, or people are practicing creating their own stories, and it's getting noticed, which is really good. And like one of my personal things is sort of like these more sort of like analog horror stories that are happening at the moment. And there's this thing called the Backrooms. And there's just, I think it's some teenager just started making some little videos of this really creepy liminal space, putting them onto YouTube, and now he's making a film on it with A24, which is fascinating. So I think in the time where we've got, no better time than to share things with the world in like sort of social media and stuff like that. That's one positive aspects of social media. But yeah, the fact of getting your stuff out there has never been easier almost for an independent creator. And I think being true to yourself is what sort of gets things noticed. It's those really in-depth, personalized stories that really, attract people.
What other plans have you got for the future, Alan? Anything you want to?
Other than just writing this story and just completing that, and then moving maybe onto the short story anthology, I actually don't have a lot going on. But yeah, just to keep writing and to keep promoting, men's mental health sort of wherever I can. That's the game plan for the foreseeable.
Fantastic. Well, thank you obviously very much for joining us today. It's been fun. I didn't realise just how much the satay was going to come back to play, but it is interesting as well to talk to somebody else who's obviously been through the whole writing a book process, and it's interesting to get that experience. We do have, Rich, a tradition, do we not?
We do indeed.
Podcast.
Well, I was just going to say before we go into the tradition, Alan, have you got anything that you want to plug, sort of any social media accounts or anything like that?
Yeah, just my social media is just Alan Rose Author, basically on Blue Sky, on Threads. You can find me on those social media platforms and on Instagram, of course, as well. So yeah, just Alan Rose Author.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we leave some links to those in our show notes as well.
Thank you.
And yeah, T.A. mentioned the tradition that we have. So what we like to do when we do a guest interview is we kind of leave the end of the episode to our guest to kind of sign off. So if there's anything that you'd like to say, just to sort of round out the episode, then the floor is yours.
Yeah, just on a personal note, just mental health is really important, and by sharing your problems, the problems are halved. Happiness is for you, and no one should be forgotten.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Two best mates, yeah, they're taking a stand. Raging Rich and T.A, got your health in the hands. Williams, laughs and tales they tell. For beats and nights, the workouts, they're keeping it real. Oh, it's the middle